Hello and welcome to Illuminate Inclusion's Quick Fire Questions. In this new series, we're going to be tackling a range of different topics relating to neurodiversity and special educational needs. Each episode will be around 10 to 15 minutes, and together with my co-host Lauren, we will be answering a range of questions on each topic. In this first episode, we're going to be talking about personal hygiene and some of the challenges associated with hygiene, particularly for children with special educational needs. So Lauren, is this something that you can remember from your childhood as being a challenge?
Yes, I'm got autism and OCD, and hygiene is one of the things I struggle with most to do with everyday life. It's quite a sensory issue, and it takes a lot to balance hygiene and ways to manage it.
So is that like the feeling of having water on you, or is it the temperature?
So I struggle with water a lot. I don't like the feeling of being wet. I don't like the temperature and being in between. I have to be one or the other. I can't have a middle ground. And also just the executive function of doing specific tasks makes me not want to do them, and I will do anything to avoid them.
Interesting. So there's a sensory aspect to it. There's also the kind of breaking it down into small steps. So things like using visuals. We'll talk about strategies later on, but things about like how you break it down so it's a more manageable and doing one thing at a time. Do you think there's an element as well of demand avoidance that can be involved? I know that's a challenge, for example, for a lot of parents who have children who have a profile of pathological demand avoidance, PDA. And there's a lot of questions that I get asked around personal hygiene and whether it's too much pressure for somebody and it's too much demand to put on them to ask them to just follow through with personal hygiene routines.
Yes, I do think there is a demand avoidance because society expects you to follow a routine, and that might not necessarily be manageable for a young person. It also, if they don't want to necessarily do it within their own daily routine, it can be really hard to keep to it. For example, the dentist, they always like to tell you you need to floss, you need to floss, but telling me to do it isn't going to make me do it. I'll do it for a few weeks, get into a routine, something will happen and the routine's gone. But every time I know they're going to tell me you need to do it, but it's just not that easy.
It's a really interesting point because actually things like going to the dentist or the doctor can also be really challenging for a lot of children and a lot of adults. And especially if you know you're going somewhere, not only just to have a health or a hygiene checkup, but also where someone's going to tell you to do things that you're either not doing or you're struggling to do, then that just adds a whole other layer of pressure onto that appointment. That's really interesting, actually. So I thought what we do is break it down into some of the key areas and think about what the challenges are and what we can do. So the first thing is talking about dentists is brushing teeth. So you've mentioned water being a challenge, but what is it about brushing teeth that can sometimes be challenging, do you think?
I think there's various things that can be challenging with brushing your teeth. The taste of the toothpaste can be one thing. The texture of a toothbrush, having to focus on your teeth individually and making sure you're covering all the surface areas. It takes a lot of time and fine motor skills to actually be able to brush well and consistently. Um, the feeling of flossing as well is not the most pleasant thing. And again, floss tends to be flavored.
Right. So there's so many sensory challenges that we can associate with just brushing your teeth. So because there's the taste, there's the texture, it can also be the temperature of the water that you're using that you mentioned earlier. So there's quite a few things. So one thing that I would then often recommend to parents is having a look at different toothpaste brands and toothpaste flavors. Sometimes mint can be a particularly strong, intense flavor. So maybe trying a different taste could be one option that might make it a little bit easier. What else do you think might help?
Definitely changing your toothpaste is great. I share my example is I use Sensodyne Kids. When I run out of my toothpaste, I have to borrow my mum's. She uses the normal adult Sensodyne. The difference is ridiculous between the mintiness taste, but it has the same amount of fluoride, surprisingly. So we're okay on that front. But to actually brush my teeth, I use a tri-sided toothbrush or a three-sided toothbrush. that allows you to cover each surface of the tooth, so the front, the back, and the top, in one brush instead of having to focus on each individual surface. So it means I'm spending less time brushing my teeth, but also doing a consistent job.
That is a really great tip. If people can't find them in the shops, I definitely recommend that they have a look online. There will be stuff
Amazon definitely
online
have them
that
in
can do that,
stock.
but just it's something as simple as having a toothbrush that covers your whole tooth, so you don't have to kind of go round each side and then over the top of each tooth separately, means that you only need to go over each area in your mouth once, I would imagine, and that just really reduces the time that someone's having to spend. And when you were mentioning earlier about executive function challenges as well, if knowing if you need to go back and repeat the same steps, you're actually reducing the number of steps that are involved in that as well. So that's amazing. So I suppose from a sensory perspective, those are really great tips. It's the toothpaste and the type of toothbrush just to minimize the time and the intensity of the toothbrushing. I suppose from an executive function point of view, having a different toothbrush that makes it easier is helpful. But also using visual aids, is that something that you thought about just in terms of, for example, having a display that says first you do this and then you do this? There's almost like a visual checklist of what steps need to be done just to break it down a little bit.
For me, I don't necessarily use a visual aid. Um, More I know exactly where everything is in the cupboard, if that makes sense. Like I have a routine when I go into the bathroom that I know I do this first, then I do this. Um, and everything's kind of placed in the same position and it's not moved, which
That's
I guess
another really
suppose is
good
a
point.
visual aid.
Yeah, I think actually that's a really helpful point if you're trying to do things either with older children or with adults, rather than younger children who might respond differently to having pictures up on the wall, something that you can just incorporate that feels quite normal and everyday in any household is just to make sure that everything is in the same place and that no one's moved the toothpaste. So your child doesn't have to go around looking for the things that they're missing. That's really helpful. So I think those are really great tips on teeth brushing. When it comes to having a shower or having a bath, um, you've mentioned the water and also the temperature. So those things we know can be challenging. I think that one additional challenge is hair washing that comes up quite a lot. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so you've obviously people struggle with washing and bathing as a separate matter, but when you add in hair washing, that's just another sensory issue. Um, Typically when you're showering or you're having a bath, it's normally neck down and your head, which people find a lot I feel like sensory issues happen a lot in like your face. So the water from washing your hair, especially I've got curly hair, it's really difficult for me. I don't like the feeling of it. So I do it separately.
Okay, so you have a shower and then separately you wash your hair sort of over the bath so you're not getting
I
your
will
body wet at the same time.
exactly. I wash it over the bath. I won't necessarily do it at the same time. I won't do it consecutively one after the other. I'll do maybe one of them I'll do in the morning and then the other I'll do in the evening. Or sometimes I'll just do one.
Right. So it just really takes some of that pressure off. And I suppose that's covering the sensory and some of those executive functions. And is less demanding as well in of itself because you're not being expected to do quite so much, especially if it's something you find difficult. In terms of hair washing, like you said that the face and your head is more sensitive to some of that
Mhm.
sensory input. Are there other things that you do, for example, whether that's having music on or some sort of background distraction that helps minimize the sensory overload that you might experience?
Yeah, so for showering, bathing, washing my hair, I always listen to music. I have multiple playlists depending on what mood I'm in. Um, Songs that I know will keep me calm and regulated. I try to balance out sensory issues, so I know that if I'm being stimulated in with touch, that maybe auditory stimulation will kind of counterbalance that. So if I'm sitting in a bath, I like to have the water running while I'm in the bath because the noise kind of balances that out. I know that if it's not running, I can't necessarily stay in there for as long as I need to. Um, so it's
Does
all
that
about
mean
finding
sometimes
ones.
like you would get in the bath when you've just turned the water on, or would you like have the tap running at the sink in this like separately but in the same room?
Oh, I start running the bath, then I get in, and then I continue. running the water in the bath. It's not great for waste and water, but like if it gets too full while I'm still in the bath, I'll let out a bit of water and then start again. Not great for, you know, the environment, but that's how I do it. I only have the water on a tiny bit while I do it, but I just need to. And I tend to normally have it really hot because I can't do in between temperatures. If it's lukewarm, my I might, like, you can see my neck move. It makes me feel sick. So I do have it hot, which isn't always the best option because I do tend to get stimulated afterwards. And then I do feel like I just need to sit for a minute. But
I think that it raises a really interesting point that for all of us, we've got different sensory profiles, and within even just one individual, it's not necessarily that your levels of sensitivity are the same to every type of sensory input. So if you're more sensitive to touch or to the kind of texture or the feeling of whether something's wet or dry, then actually stimulating a different sense. So for you, it's having the sound of the water running or the music, or for someone else, it might be, for example, watching something on an iPad even, that helps then calm down or kind of any excessive sensory input they're having from the feeling of the water, because they're so sensitive to touch more so than they are to kind of auditory input. And balancing that out might be something that's actually quite helpful to try.
yeah, and I think choosing your products is also really important to balancing out your sensory issues, because most products have quite strong smells and they're often floral. And if it's something that smells not great, I'm not going to want to use it. So obviously there's really basic, like maybe for sensitive skin products that don't normally have an odor or like floral smell to them, which I think is quite good. But I just tend to use the same product. Once I stick with it, I tend to just use the same product and kind of keep to it. It does bother me when the packaging changes, and I think that can actually deter people from wanting to have a bath. If your child's got a set routine, I use this packaging of this soap, and then as they do frequently change, it does set you off a little bit.
Yeah, I didn't even think about packaging changing, but that on its own is a bit like, oh, what's going on, and is it going to smell the same? But I think, as you've said, by managing the sensory input, that includes kind of the sense of the different products you're using, whether it's um just kind of soap or shampoo or any bath products that you're using. I think that's really helpful just to think about, and whether or not you need to stock up on a certain things that you've got the same ready to go. The one other thing that you mentioned, because we've spoken quite a bit about sensory differences and how we can accommodate those, but you mentioned about routine, and I wonder whether or not that's something to think about as well for parents, or if they've got a child who's struggling, or for adults as well, in a sense that does it help with the level of demand that you feel and the pressure to do something if it's happening at the same time every day, so you just kind of do that as part of your normal routine rather than being asked or told to do something?
I think that depends on the day. Routine for me on a daily basis is great, and I thrive off of it. But you can't take into account always your level of emotion that day or sensitivity. So it's about kind of spotting the signs and measuring when's the time to take a win on the battle, when's the time to kind of lose it. For me, I know that I can establish a routine and I will stick to it on the majority of the time. But on an off day, sometimes that routine goes on the window, and measuring when it's needed and when it's not, I think is a kind of like a,
Right.
not a trick, but it's just a skill to kind of learn and develop in just kind of sensing.
I think that's great. So it's about where we can establish routines. Those are really helpful the majority of the time, but also recognizing that there are times when that just does need to go to one side if there's a particularly intense emotional response to something on any particular day. So that's amazing. So we've spoken about sensory difficulties, we've spoken about some of the executive function challenges, and that need to kind of keep routine and consistency as well to help with some of the demand avoidance. Thank you for sharing all of your thoughts and your personal experiences with us today. You have been watching Illuminate Inclusion's quickfire questions on personal hygiene. We hope that you found this episode helpful.